Hey y'all, so I am back with another video. I've been thinking about this all morning, and instead of me just thinking about it and sitting in my thoughts, which I'm really good for, I decided to record and flesh out my thoughts and see what y'all think about it as well. So, the title of this particular video will be Why No One Wants to Work in Childcare. Now, due to the pandemic, but honestly, the pandemic is just an excuse because the pandemic was just a boiling point, and not just in childcare, which I will get into more in detail in this video, just in general, especially the jobs that require face to face interactions, meaning you can't do it virtually. Like you need a cashier at a store. Yes, you can buy things online depending if the store has an online presence, but for the most part, any job that has to do with face-to-face interaction, this is customer service, this is childcare, this is anything that you have to do face-to-face customer service, whether it's like the post office or anything, really, fill in the blanks. If you do it in person, this is why a lot of people since the pandemic have been leaving these jobs. Now, it's easy to point to these people and be like, oh, well, you're being selfish, or even worse, you're lazy, you don't want to work, you want to bum off the government. But in reality, that is one of the reasons why a lot of people in this case, for this video, in childcare, people are quitting. Now, this is not just my opinion or what I think versus actually what I know anecdotally, as well as hearing other people in that particular field, childcare. Now, when it comes to childcare, the job description is pretty straightforward. And you see this on any job board, whether we're talking about Craigslist, Glassdoor, Idealist, it's pretty straightforward. There are regulations from the Department of Education, Early Childhood. And what that means is that you are adhering to state and federal regulations when it comes to child caring. So if you are an independent child care provider, i.e. you have a daycare center within your home, then that has different type of regulations, but still regulation as opposed to, let's say, a child care center from a company. But nonetheless, EEC is what regulates and allows you to continue your daycare business. When you're in the role, for the most part, outside of administrative, the ones who are on the ground floor working with the kids are either lead teachers, assistant teachers, and teachers. What is the difference? Not much, but lead teachers tend to get paid more. And when I say more, like $1 or $2 more, it's nothing dramatic. And they are the ones who are the people, usually women in these fields, but it's usually the person who has the most responsibilities in the sense of like they're the ones who have to sign up on things. They're the ones who disperse the information to the team. They are the team leader. They take instructions from higher management, but also they are the ones responsible for the fluidity of the team, how to cohesively work with other people, even when it comes to interacting with the parents. Essentially, they have more of a liability on their shoulders, especially if something goes wrong, they would be the ones to answer for it. They are just the lead teacher, but for the most part, there is not much of a difference when it comes to the day-to-day activity with the children from lead teacher to assistant teacher. Teacher, which is in the middle, they do relatively the same thing as a lead teacher. They are there to assist the lead teacher as well as the assistant teacher. And the assistant teacher is kind of like the name suggests, an assistant. They have the least amount of liability, but for the most part, they do the same job. So some of y'all might be like, okay, what does that mean? Less responsibility. So the assistant teacher may assist. So they might do diaper changes. They might be getting the meals. They might do, let's say, potty training or whatever, or changing the diapers. Whereas the lead teacher would be doing the curriculum and speaking out to the parents and maybe writing up reports. And the teacher would be doing basically both of those interactions. Now, if this was truly a team in the image that I am depicting, it wouldn't matter whose role is this, that, and the third, because everybody has to change the children depending on the age range that we're working with. Everyone has to speak to the parents. Everybody has to do the cleanup. Like Everybody has to be licensed or at least get some type of approval from the regulation, not only from the center, but also when it comes to the federal and state regulations from EEC, right? But what tends to happen in these roles for teachers is that they are overworked, disrespected, and underpaid. What do I mean by that? Oftentimes, there is a hierarchy within that dynamic that I talked about: teacher, lead teacher, assistant teacher. Again, everybody does the same work, but because of the positionality and the slight pay raises between the teacher and the lead teacher, the assistant teacher is often looked as the flunky and treated as such too, with little regard, little input, and basically is treated like the rag dog. Let's just be honest. The teacher is there to do the grunt work that the lead teacher doesn't want to do. The things that maybe, let's say, for example, lead teacher may be socially awkward, so they don't really want to deal with the parents. That would fall back on the teacher. Or let's say the lead teacher really wants to do this assignment within the classroom with the children, but the teacher is stuck like doing the cleanup. So there is some type of underlying hierarchy between those three roles, as well as there is disrespect. It may not be to the point where people are cussing each other out, but it's very dismissive and it's very much, I am of higher title, so therefore you're my subordinate, therefore you're my flunky. There is that energy. There's a slight power struggle within those particular roles, especially when it comes to taking initiatives to doing projects and putting input within the center, within the curriculum, that oftentimes if you are not a lead teacher or a teacher, you don't get your point heard. Now, on top of that, when we say burnout, depending on the role, again, this is very diverse in childcare. We could be talking about like a daycare center, but we could also be talking about like an after school teacher, but we could also be talking about like a residential. So again, childcare is an umbrella type of field and it gets more defined depending on what avenue you go towards. But I'm speaking more so when we're talking about daycare centers. So with burnout, what do I mean by burnout? Burnout occurs when teachers are overworked. Now, again, it's pretty straightforward, but you have to also counter in things that are unexpected. Unexpected things like various trainings. Just because you are hired in these positions does not mean that you don't continuously have to do trainings to upkeep your profile in your profession. Now, if you are in a classroom with 10 plus kids, whether they are babies, infants, or middle schoolers, high schoolers, that's a drag. Emotional labor is labor. And then on top of that, to be expected to do these professional trainings and read certain material, as well as be able to meet the other aspects of the job, including administrative, because you have to have your paperwork together. Again, like I said, you have to go to these trainings. You have to sometimes even do parent-teacher nights and things of that nature. And that spills over from not just what you do, whatever your hours are. Let's say it's 9 to 5 or 7 to 3 or 8 to 4, whatever the time is for you. That's more energy that you are giving on top of the role that you're currently in. And you don't know what family you're getting. You don't know the family dynamics. We don't know what children we're getting. Some children are easy peasy, but then there are certain children who have a lot of extra needs. This could be developmental needs. This could be academic needs. This could be impoverished needs. Let's say they come from a low income family. And then we're dealing with parents. Again, some parents are easy peasy, and there's some parents who are very demanding. And you, as the teacher, whatever you get, you're supposed to digest, right? So I just covered why childcare in and of itself is exhausting. And because these roles are predominantly filled by women, that means that oftentimes these teachers have kids of their own. So imagine going to work and spending 8 hours with kids, different kind of kids, different backgrounds, different needs, different expressions, and so on and so forth. And then having to go home and do the same cooking, the same cleaning, the same educating. It's exhausting. And we haven't even gotten into the pay rate. Now, my personal belief is that because the field is predominantly dominated by women, and it's not because women are hogging up all the teacher space, as opposed to men for the most part don't want to do care work. Now, it could be a society thing where it's like, oh, that's women's work. But a part of it also is that does not appeal to men. Whereas people automatically think because women have vaginas that we naturally are mothering and naturally are nurturing and naturally want to take care of kids. Like that is something that spills out of us. Like that's just something we innately have. Like two eyes. We just know how to be motherly, which is not the case. But because these fields are often geared towards women, they are more open to women and are positioned for women, women are underpaid, undervalued, which increases the high turnover rate. Because these are fields that are dominated by women, those who hire women, which sometimes are women, but also sometimes they are men, the thought is, oh, because this is quote unquote woman's work, we can pay it less, as if your landlord is going to charge you less in rent because you're doing quote unquote woman's work. As if when you go to the gas pump, it's going to cost you less money to fill up your tank because you're doing women's work. As if when you go grocery shopping to fill up your motherfucking cart, the cashier's gonna be like, hey, you don't gotta pay the final tab. You don't have to pay the final number on the screen. We're going to give you a discount. You're gonna have to pay less because you're doing women's work. As crazy as that sounds to you listening to that, it sounds even more crazier for me to say that. So what I'm saying is essentially, just because this is deemed quote unquote woman's work, that does not mean the bills that needs to be paid is somehow less because you're doing quote unquote woman's work, meaning pay women their worth. So we're already dealing with an overbearing, high intensity field that is childcare. And then we're talking about the low pay. And we're talking about the work conflict of different people treated differently depending on their titles. And we haven't even gotten into the benefits, if there are benefits. Because again, these fields don't respect the workers. So oftentimes you'll find that there might be extremes. Some positions, they might be like really, really good benefits. But other positions, they might be the bare minimum. In other situations, they'll be even say, we'll go half with benefits. We'll go half with insurance. We'll go half with, sometimes they offer childcare at a discount in the center that you're working in. So they also try to find a way to undercut you. You might find something as piss poor as 3 sick days, if they even offer sick days, maybe 2 weeks of vacation for the whole year. And again, depending on the program, there are some programs that are school year. What does that mean? Just like school year for children, it's open in September, it closes in June. So then you have the summer months where you're struggling and trying to figure out how your bills are going to get paid because you don't get paid during summers until your contract comes back around for you to sign starting in September, and you do the whole process again. Other childcare facilities, they are opened year round. So there isn't any summer breaks. So again, it all depends on what program we're talking about, this and a third, the nuances. But for the most part, the workplace is pretty much the same. Because childcare is not something that you can do independently because of ratios, but also because of how much it is demanding, it really is based off of teamwork. It's not like you get to choose the company and the people who work for the company and all the nuances that make the workplace worthwhile or worth quitting. Now, let's go over to the administrative part. There's a lot of administrators who work in the office, who do the payments, who do, let's say, the background documentations and whatnot. They feel as if because they work in the office, they don't have to come into the center. They don't have to engage with the teachers. They don't have to engage with the parents. They don't have to engage with the students or the children. They don't have to do anything. So oftentimes they don't have an open and honest relationship with the staff. They don't have any type of familiarity. There isn't any type of like, we may not be pals, but at least we are associates. There's none of that. And oftentimes when the administrators come into the facility, it's a way of low-key intimidation, low-key evaluating. Oftentimes when these administrators come into the facility, they're not there to be a part. They're there to judge. They're there to criticize. They're there to mark what you could have done better and how you could have done it better, this, that, and a third. Any person knows that positive reinforcement incentives drives productivity. If you come into any space, you barely know the person who's coming in to observe you work, and all they got for you is criticism. They don't know how the agenda works. They don't know how the curriculum works. They don't even know these kids by names. They don't know nothing about nothing. But here they are telling you you're not working hard enough, even though you, if you're in childcare, you will face wage theft. What does that mean? You might be off the clock at 3 or 4 or 5 or 6. But if that kid in your daycare center isn't home or isn't picked up by their parent or guardian or whoever is allowed to pick up that kid, guess what? You got to wait around until you find out who's responsible for this kid and why they aren't there. You're not getting paid extra for that. And we haven't even talked about certain programs because, again, it's different. Certain programs, the teachers or the center is responsible for the cooking. The teachers also are responsible for any type of misconduct. This could be misconduct with children. This could be like, let's say a child has fell and scarred something or broke something or whatever the case may be. Like, you're all responsible for that. When you leave the center, you just can't leave the center with the kids. You have to have permission slips. You have to have first aid. You have to have a whole setup before you even think about leaving the premises. Again, all of that can be stressful depending on the person we're talking about, but nonetheless, the expectation is this is the role, act accordingly. Now back to the administrators. The administrators do look down on the teachers. What do I mean by they look down on the teachers? Oftentimes they don't speak to the teachers like they are adults, like they have sense. Oftentimes, again, it's very much, I talk down to you, you're my subordinate, and if you don't like it, then find another job. Oftentimes the administrators, granted, depending on the program, depending, the nuances of the whole conversation. Depending, some administrators, they got a real cushy job. They do a bit of the office work. They do a little bit of the phone work. They push papers around and they attend the meetings, the bare minimum. And then there are administrators who are actively engaged. But for the most part, the administrators stay in their lane. The teachers stay in their lane. The parents may interact depending on what type of parents you have. Some parents are overly involved. Some parents are barely involved, and everything in between. But it is exhausting as a teacher, especially day in and day out, where your worth is undervalued, where you are underpaid, where you are stressed, where you don't work as a cohesive team with the other people in your fucking team, where you speak to administration and they're telling you basically, we're not going to change anything. We will listen to your grievances until we tell you we don't want to hear them anymore, but we're not going to take any proactive change. We're not going to do any type of cohesive team work where you're going to have to take wage theft on top of being undercompensated. And these are just quote unquote the nature of the job. So you're telling, and this is all before the pandemic now, you're telling me that people experienced globally the closest thing to an Armageddon in the sense of like, you can't tell what COVID looks like. It's not something that's physical. It's a virus. It is microscopic. And a lot of people were being touched by the Rona in different parts of the world. Rona was so effective that we had to shut down society. And you're telling me these life changes that we're still feeling the effects of, whether you believe the pandemic caused inflation or not, I'm on the side it did not. These capitalists be greedy, period. Regardless of what you believe, this is the current era that we live in. And people have experienced way too much, have gone through way too much to be told to get back to normal, get back to being burnt out, get back to being disrespected, get back to being underfunded, get back to working with people who you don't like, they don't like you, and administration who are off the clock. They're not doing what they're supposed to do. And everybody's doing the bare minimum so they can continue getting their EEC validation while they hope in the middle of this particular school year, nobody quits. But if they do quit, up, back on the Indeed, up, back on the Glassdoor, up, back on the Idea list. And just like any other time of the year, high turnover rates, like a kitchen door coming and going. What do you think that does over time to the work field? People talk, adults talk. My personal experience is that I would never go back into childcare. That was a scarring experience for me. And I'm not even talking about the other experience where I worked at a residential that literally was a cult. And no exaggeration, no capping, dead assing, a cult. From that experience, I would never go into childcare because A, that was not my expectation when I came out of college with a bachelor's in psychology. But also, it's not humane. That's not the way you treat people. People are people. And in these fields, I'm going to be honest, especially when we're talking about the human services field, we're talking about childcare, we're talking about psychology. It's funny that we put the emphasis on people, but the people doing the work for the people are treated less than, subpar, subhuman. And that's the gag of it all. You would think a field that is dominated by empathy, people to people interaction, understanding social emotional skills would be top experts at executing such. And they're not to their workers, not to their employees. And that's why there's high turnover rates. And also, that is why there are people who are saying, don't get into these fields. Do not get into childcare. Do not get into education. Do not get into mental health. Not because it's not important, not because there isn't a real interest. It's because you're going to face what everybody faces, which is undercompensated. And some of these hiring directors, hiring staff, CEOs, recruitment team, whatever, for these childcare centers, what they're hoping is that those who loosely qualify for these positions will be so desperate that they'll take these teacher positions. But when you do that, you leave room for those who have nefarious intentions to take on these roles because it's so easy to get these jobs because these jobs are notoriously horrible when it comes to longevity for teachers. That's why they have high turnover rates. So it leaves and creates a opportunity for those who don't have the best in mind for students, children, etc., to fill in these roles. But also it leaves room for those who are looking for in the moment, for the meantime type of job, meaning they'll sign the contract, they'll take on the role, but what they're really doing is looking for a better opportunity. Rent still is calling, bills are still calling. They'll take on the position, but they're hoping within the next 3 months of being within that job, they'll find a better position, they'll leave. So again, fueling that high turnover rate. And I know some people might be listening to this and be like, well, that's messed up and this, that, and the third. Again, you pay your workers minimum. It may not be minimum wage, but what is $15 an hour? What is $18 an hour? What is $20 an hour? Like, what is that? In the face of inflation, when rent is increasing, groceries are increasing, gas prices are increasing, what is $20 an hour? Especially when you live in a metropolitan city like I do. What is $20 an hour? And it's not like any of those places where you gotta come out of pocket or giving you any discounts because you do care work. Absolutely not. So yes, some of y'all might be like, well, childcare isn't cheap. So like, where's the money going to? It's not going to the teachers, I'll tell you that. It may not even be going to the administrators like that. They might be making middle, like 40, 50, maybe 60K a year. But the ones who are banking are the ones who actually own the center. They're the ones who are living their bestest life. Meanwhile, those who do the grunt work, who do the face-to-face work, who raise these kids, love on these kids, educate these kids, care for these kids, the teachers, they get paid in pennies on the dollar, overworked and burned out. And it doesn't matter if it's a nonprofit, if it's a for-profit, if it's urban, if it's rural, if it's whatever. The same common denominator factors are found in every situation. And in these fields, they never say, oh, how can we management look at ourselves, rearrange what we thought was normal? How do we improve our skill sets, right? What type of training that we need to go to be better? No, the expectation is you take it or you leave it. And a lot of people are leaving these fields. There's a teacher shortage. There's a childcare shortage. There's so many shortages where the emphasis is human to human interaction. Why do you think so? I got a girlie who is a teacher who works with preschoolers who are like, you know what, I'm burnt out. And when I met her, I was like, girl, I used to be after school teacher. Like, I'm still on my burnt out tour. I don't ever want to work in those type of environments anymore because the sheer disrespect and inhumane treatment is baffling, especially when you are quote unquote overly qualified, meaning you went to the higher education route, you got your degrees, you have your experiences, you knocked every requirement off of the checklist, and you're still being treated as inhumane. Not saying if you have a GED or a high school diploma, you should be treated inhumane, but you would think if we did all the expectations society wanted us to do, we would at the very least be treated decently. And we cannot afford that decency nor a livable wage. So my girlie who works in preschool is like, you know what? I don't think I'm coming back to this job. I stuck it out for 2 years. It's not even April. And she's like, I'm so burnt out. I'm so over this. And she's looking into getting into tech. And a lot of people are looking to get into other fields that don't have to do with that interpersonal face-to-face interaction. Why? Because the companies don't value that. And because tech, whether you like it, you don't like it, big tech and all that jazz, because tech is a la mode, and a lot of people don't understand tech besides the devices that they purchase, it's more advantageous and it pays well for you to get into tech. Now, tech takes some time. You have to have technical skills. You have to have the ambition, the knowledge, the time investment, and so on and so forth. But a lot of people are going that route because at least they'll be able to pay their bills and at least they can work remote and still have their dignity at the end of the day. So that is why a lot of people are not trying to work in childcare. And these are not complaints that I'm pulling out my ass. These are not complaints that I just heard from disgruntled employees. Ask anybody. Ask anybody. They're leaving these fields because of the aforementioned points that I mentioned within this video. And y'all might think, oh, well, it's just a few people, who cares? There's a shortage now. What happens in the next 5, 10, 15 years if Earth is still intact because, climate change and the possibility of World War III with Russia and Ukraine and NATO affiliates and all that shit, gang jumping in this bitch. But nonetheless, what happens when nobody wants to be a teacher? And nobody wants to be a mental health provider. Nobody wants to be a therapist. Nobody wants to be a daycare provider. Nobody wants to do that. If you think childcare is expensive now, what happens when the only type of childcare that matters is if you can hire a private nanny? Then what happens? When you can only afford to pay a private teacher? When charter schools are the new public schools, and private schools is the standard, or homeschooling is the standard, then what happens? Then what happens? It's not necessarily that you have to only worry about IE and robots taking over. You also have to worry about what if no one wants to do this job anymore because of how companies treat workers. And teachers are not something that you could just dismiss. Without teachers, there is no education, there is no developmental, there is nothing without teachers. Teachers are what makes us who we are today. We had to be taught by somebody, and whoever influenced us shapes us. So if you have no influence, you have no leader, then you just have a bunch of sheeples. So I don't got all the answers, way. I really don't. But these are some of the issues that a lot of workers find themselves in, especially in this field of childcare, because of the struggles. And people are not going to struggle the way that they used to prior pandemic. People are not just going to eat it, take it to the face and be like, this is just the nature of the job. Absolutely not. So that is my video Tell me what you think in the comments down below. But do you relate to this? Have you worked in the childcare field? Have you been a teacher? Have you been a mental health provider, or whatever the case may be? What was your experience? And if you're still there, what is keeping you there? Sometimes it'd be the benefits. Sometimes the only positive things about these jobs are the benefits. And if you have a chronic illness or you have someone within your family who benefits from your benefits, sometimes you just got to take it to the face, because the person that you love, maybe that person is you, self-love is the best love, is dependent on that insurance from that employer, even though they are robbing you of your dignity each and every day. So tell me your experience down below, and I'll read them and I may respond to them. With all that being said, y'all, be blessed, be enlightened, be loved. I shall see you in the next video. Peace.